Great. Hello, everyone, and welcome for joining this webinette, our short but sharp sessions to be able to deliver some really fantastic content around Virtuoso capabilities. This week, great. Hello, and welcome, everyone, to this short Virtuoso webinette, our 20-minute sessions with short, sharp content focusing on some great features that Virtuoso has to offer. In this session, we're going to be talking about using assertions. And without further ado, let's do that. So number one, who am I? James Bent. Apparently, I'm the go-to sales engineer. It just means I'm the one that keeps saying yes when they ask me things to do. More than happy to do so. And I do like to keep things simple. It's the best way for me to understand, and I think for most people to grasp even the most technical of topics. Look, let's get into it. So what's our agenda today? It is a short, sharp session. I am not going to spend too much time looking at slides. We are going to be looking into Virtuoso, particularly around using assertions. We will give a quick introduction to Virtuoso and then talk across what are assertions, what are some examples, why use them, before we're going to get stuck straight into Virtuoso providing a demo of the platform. So here's an introduction. So Virtuoso. As we like to say, ship gets done faster with Virtuoso. Virtuoso delivers a test hyperautomation that empowers anyone, and I'll talk about exactly what we mean by anyone shortly, to create robust, functional, end-to-end and integration tests for any web application. If it's accessed via a browser, Virtuoso can be used to test it, and we enable you to do that codelessly. It's an easy to use platform that really does give you a real good shitstorm out of the good kind to release high quality software. And as you can see on screen, we like bots, so we put them all over the place. But then let's talk about assertions. What are they? So to quote Wikipedia, my go-to source of reference for all things anything, in computer software testing, a test assertion is an expression which encapsulates some testable logic specified about a target under test. And they help testers and engineers ensure that tests of the target relate properly and clearly to the corresponding specified statements about the target. Okay, so what does that mean? It would probably help to start with some examples. And there are many. For example, you could have to do things like look for an element on the page, assert that something exists, assert that something equals an expected result. Maybe a price on screen meets the price that you expect to be shown for a particular product. It could be things like whether something contains some text, whether it's less or equal, greater or equal to a particular value, whether it matches a statement, whether something is selected like a checkbox, whether something is checked, also like a checkbox, or a variable. But then not only withstanding those sorts of assertions that can be done, you've also got to take into account about how you use the assertions in conjunction with data. So for example, if I want to assert against I've written something in a particular field that I want to check against, or whether I want to use test data, whether I want to randomize data, use data from API calls and then assert based on the feedback, or whether I use stored or dynamic data or even expressions. So what we're going to do now that I've seen some examples of assertions, is you can see that, okay, cut, start from there. So having been provided some examples, it's also really important to be able to understand as to why would you use assertions. So, I mean, assertions aren't really doing things like, let's say, clicking on a button or writing something in a box. They're not testing really the functional side of things so much. But what they are doing is they are checking that beyond the functionality, that assertions will check that given certain inputs, the application on the test gives certain outputs. It might be, as I press a button to save a sales order record, that sales order record status goes to ordered, for example. So I click the button and then I'm going to assert the status meets that expected result. So it does check a slice of functionality in terms of whether it's evidence of outputting logic, the presence of something existing, a status, the results, even calculations. But they also ensure that tests are easily testable. And this is an important topic in as much that when people say, how do you test the test? While assertions in themselves don't necessarily do that, they do enable you to be able to check easily and visually. If an assertion has met an expected result, then it becomes easier to validate the actual test itself. And that's as much to say that clear observable outputs, as you can see on screen here, can be validated without the need to manually decide if elements are in a certain state. And this is important, as you'll see as we jump into the demo in a second. It's especially important when you build tests from requirements, which you can do so with Virtuoso. So on that note, assertions with Virtuoso, big drum roll, the demo. So let's jump across into Virtuoso, the platform, which is exactly what we're looking at now. This is Virtuoso. We are a browser-based application, and we are meant to codelessly test any browser application, whether a front-end website, like for instance here you can see the Virtuoso website, or it could be an e-commerce store, it could be a banking website, it could be a Salesforce, an SAP S/4HANA. If it's browser-based, if it can be hit with the URL, it can be tested with Virtuoso. And as you can see on screen, the means of being able to create tests is to write in plain English. For example, if I have a book a demo button I want to click, then I can simply write click on book a demo, for example. You write steps using syntax in natural language with the element you want to interact with. That's as much as you have to do to create working automation. But actually, before we jump in and look at assertions, what I do want to sort of drill into is the fact that because you can write tests in plain English, you can start leveraging whether it's BDD requirements, wireframes, designs, specifications, user stories, anything at the planning stage that starts to describe the actual features that will be built. You can start leveraging those to begin authoring at the design or the planning stage, so pre-development. But what it also means is that you can embed within your test the requirements, if those are, let's say, in a BDD format, or it could be the user stories. I can have my requirement which says there must be a book a demo button that I should be able to click. So even though development hasn't completed, it may not have started, you can begin writing the steps against requirements. But you can also start putting in the assertions against the expected outputs, which are defined in the requirement, in this case with the then statements. So for example, here, if the requirement says I should be able to book a demo with Virtuoso, then I could say assert that the booking confirmation appears or exists, for example. So I can start writing assertions to be able to actually match back to the requirements. And this is how what we'll show as we get to the end of this short webinette, how you can use assertions to help validate whether the test is actually correct against the requirement. But look, let's actually get into what we're here, which is to look at using assertions with Virtuoso. So the crux of it really, again, just as you can write functional steps, maybe click on accept cookies, and by doing that, you can interact with the accept cookies, you can start writing all manner of assertions, which I'll talk you through some examples. And again, note how we've written this against some fairly simple requirements in terms of navigating to the site, seeing the front page. Through at the end, we're going to look at how we can validate that you do get a booking demo confirmation in this case. But if we start going through, one of the simplest assertions is to check that something exists on the page. So by looking for this element and that passing, it asserts that the element is present. It's the simplest assertion we can really do. We can deal with that in another way, which could be sort of a reverse, which is to say, by clicking the accept cookies, I expect then the accept cookies to disappear. So I could validate that, because even though the step might pass where I can click the button, if that doesn't actually make the bar disappear, then the functionality hasn't actually worked as the user would expect it to. So by asserting now, once I've clicked that the accept cookies doesn't exist on the page and that goes green, I performed an assertion which is validating the functionality, the output of clicking the accept cookies button. But then if we step forwards I mean, that's using quite simple things in terms of an element on the page, for example. I'm just simply looking at the page, and I'll talk about how Virtuoso identifies these in a second. But then we can be doing things like, for example, here, I could store the text on screen here. So I could store that in a parameter. So store that text, which this is obviously a bit of copy, but it could be storing an order ID, an order status, anything into a parameter. What I can then do is assert that parameter, in this case, that does it contain no coding skills required, as you don't need when you're using Virtuoso. We can see that, yes, it does. No coding skills required. So the assertion has passed. So we can start using a different form of an assertion here. We can do things like here, where we've gone down similar to storing data. In this case, we've stored the element details of a particular element. So in this case, the meet one of our team into a parameter, which then captures all of the element details, including in this case, the attributes and all of the relative styles. And what we're now doing is asserting whether it contains, is greater than, is less than in terms of different attributes. So where I'm looking at booking rect top, where if we look in here, the booking and the rect and the top is 155. So we're asserting that it's greater than 150. It is. Or if it's less than 200 for the bottom, which again it is. So again, the assertions are passing in this case based on attributes that we have stored. So you can start to see that you can do some pretty powerful things here with assertions, even though all I have to do to write these is simply say it could be assert in this case that booking.text equals, say, meet one of our team. That's all I have to do to write the assertion. It's really straightforward to do so. If we scroll on down, we could then look and say, when I'm on the Booker demo time page, I want to check that 7:30 doesn't exist. Maybe we've set that you can't book demos at 7:30 in the morning. So I want to validate that nobody can book one at that time. Again, it's passed based on looking into the application and checking for that existing. But then coming down, we're doing things, you can start doing some more sort of logic, some expression-based assertions. So in this case, I am storing the duration of the meeting time, in this case, into a parameter, 45 minutes. But now what I've done is combine this with test data. So I've come across and I've set up some test data, which I could upload from a CSV file. So I could parameterize this and then set up the test data scenarios. I've got a very simple couple here, the duration of meeting time that's expected. What I can then do is map that test data into my test. So I can say I want to use the assertions table. And then now when I build this assertion, I'm going to say check that the duration on screen is equal to the meeting duration from the test data. I want to check that the meeting duration is indeed always 45 minutes. And by doing that and asserting that if that result equals true, then it passes. In this case, it's correct. On screen, we have 45 minutes. In the test data, we have 45 minutes. So it shows now how you can use assert against explicit data, stored data, test data. But then if we go down, what I'm going to do is now go through and fill in a form, which is saying I've picked the time. And what I'm going to do now is go on and start filling out the form with all of the first name, last names. But in this case, I'm not going to generate that data myself. I'm going to randomly generate a first name, a last name, an email address. I'm going to then perform an assertion against the email to say, I want to make sure that nobody with a Yahoo can do this. But what I've done is said, even if that fails, I've set this so the test can still continue, but you raise an error. And so in this case, the address is a Hotmail, so it doesn't contain Yahoo, it's failed. But in this case, I could say that's okay. You know, as if I see a failure, actually, I want that. I could have written this as assert the email does not contain Yahoo. But in any case, I can see the warning, but let the test continue. Then I can go through and start writing that data into the fields, the first name, last name, the email address. What I can do here as well is I could also make an API call. So in this case, I've called in to get user details, which have returned the test result or test data results, in this case, by way of the payload. So I'm getting user details for an ID, an email, first name, last name. And of course, the API call has a response. So in this way, I could also be writing an assertion that checks the API response. check I don't get a 400, for example, when I make the API call. So by using the response.status, which comes from response.status here, I can assert on that to see does it meet an expected result. So whether this is setting up test data or whether it's looking at making a series of service calls, you can start asserting on API calls as well. We can even do things like picking, in this case, data from a dropdown. I'm picking United Kingdom from the country dropdown. Then I could assert that United Kingdom was indeed picked. So when I clicked on that, did it pick United Kingdom in that dropdown? So you can start to see actually the range of assertions you can perform here to check that things have occurred is really, really powerful. And I mentioned at the start that anyone can write codeless automation with Virtuoso. And when I mean anyone, we have customers, whether it's manual testers, BAs, product owners, can all create this sort of automation, and they do across our customer base. But then thinking back to that step, about using requirements. So remember, the end of this, I'm going through and booking a demo, and I have a statement that says, the requirement says, if I click on confirm, I should be able to get a booking confirmation. So I should be able to assert the test is successful when I get a booking confirmation. So against that, by clicking on confirm, I then get a booking confirmation. So I can look for that. So I could assert just by looking for booking confirmed. I could store then the details of the time into a parameter, which includes the text. And then I could assert that the booking details text contains 8:30, which I could have done. I've done on explicit value, but equally I could have done based on test data to say I expect to be able to book a time within the test data. So basically here I can look and say if those steps do correlate back, which now means they're easy because not only can anyone write these, but anyone can read the tests. I can read and see there was a requirement that said the test out should be I should book a demo. And if I can see a booking confirmation, which I can, then that assertion does indeed correlate back to be able to book a demo. It's easier for me to validate that not only has the test passed, but that it's valid based on the requirement and the assertion. And just very quickly, before asking if any questions, note that in creating this automation, when Virtuoso runs this, it's looking into the DOM level to discover all of the element selectors. So we're basically populating XPath, IDs, class names that are present in the DOM by looking for the hint. We are launching headless browsers to be able to go ahead and perform the test using bots. So this will run at the speed of the application, giving you insights such as screenshots automatically captured. You can read the test steps, but also clearly see things like from the performance side, how long this took to run, steps passing, failing. So you can get immediate version-based outputs to be able to validate your test results. Great, so hopefully that has been really informative. And I'll just move this back into presentation mode to ask, are there any questions and answers? And looks like we do have a couple, which is very good. I see that you did it on your booking a demo website. So I guess now I should go and book a demo. Yes, is the answer. Absolutely. More than happy for anyone to, of course, reach out and, have a conversation about how Virtuoso works. And there's another one here, which is, so do you have good documentation around your assertions? Okay. Yeah, the answer is, and actually the question was, is this easy to learn and is there documentation? But if I jump across, the answer is yes, it is easy to learn. We do provide onboarding and customer success support. At any time in the platform, you have access to reach out to our customer success team. So if you have any questions, you can also always ask that. But then also, if we look in our documentation, you can see that, yes, we do have really good documentation with examples in terms of how to be able to use any of the assertions I've been talking about, including if you want to go in depth to use things like expressions, for example, to be able to build out further and validate your tests. Okay, otherwise looks like that is all the questions for today. I think we have gone a couple of minutes over, but hopefully that has been informative. So all that is left for me to say is thank you very much. And If you do want to find out more, virtuoso.qa, come and reach out and have a conversation. We'll be more than happy to show you how the platform works in your world. Thank you very much.